Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMahon and Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome, everybody, to the Consultants Way podcast. I'm Anthony Paluska. We're here with Dean McMahon, and today we are joined with Mitchell Palsson. Mitchell, we're excited to have you here today. I know we have a bit of a relationship going back and forth, just being in this space and in this industry and always talking about professional services things. And I know you've got a strong passion for this as we do. So very excited to dive into this conversation today and learn a little bit more about you and let the audience learn a little bit more about you and a couple of key topics that we're focusing on here. So, Mitchell, if you don't mind, kick us off with a brief introduction of yourself, and then we'll dive into the topic here.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So I've spent the last several years leading professional services operations teams at fast-growing software companies. I actually started my career deeper in delivery, building solutions, managing projects, and working directly with clients. And along the way, I realized that having strong delivery skills alone wasn't enough. And really, to lead effectively, I had to understand how the business works beyond professional services. So things like how PS drives revenue, how utilization impacts profitability, and how to translate technical work into business value. And so that learning curve is really what shaped my passion for helping other people bridge that same gap.
Yeah, to put a bow on all of that, right, and to put a term associated with it, right, I think what you're really passionate about is the need for business acumen to be injected into professional services development and conversations, because sometimes many of us grow up through the professional services ladder and are focused heavily on the technical side of things, or even the domain side of what industry do I serve, but lose sight occasionally of the business acumen necessary to say, okay, how does my professional services organization fit into the overarching business that I'm operating within? And then how do my clients' businesses actually operate so that I can add more value and affect those? Is that a fair label to put on that?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And a lot of what it comes down to is that there's just a traditional focus within software companies on technical excellence. And PS teams are really packed full of excellent consultants who know their softwares and solutions inside and out. But they're often just trained to think about the solutions themselves and not the outcomes that they're trying to deliver. And so at the same time, companies just assume that their leaders are going to pick up business skills and business acumen on the fly, which really rarely happens. And this disconnect creates a gap where technologists are struggling to speak the language of business, and their executives are struggling to see the value of professional services beyond just the billable hour. And so the result that I've seen is that there's missed revenue targets, poor alignment, and frustrated clients that wouldn't exist if there was just some investment into developing business acumen.
Yeah, I think that it's very hard to bring a client executive along the journey of not just implementation, but getting an outcome if you can't relate to them, right? And that the things that we might want to talk about aren't what they're thinking about or how they talk. Also, and you and I've talked about this before, I sometimes want to interject in the business acumen overall topic some understanding of just the history of how business got here. Just some a little bit of broader perspective, so that when somebody throws something at you, you can align it into something that it makes sense and respond. It is, I think, maybe in the broadest sense, our biggest challenge in making technical consultants into advisors and into making real impact.
Yeah, I totally agree. As a consultant, you're so focused on your solution and you want to talk about the features and functionalities, and you think that your clients are going to be as excited about that as you are, and yet they're thinking in a totally different dimension of this is the outcome that I'm looking for. I don't really care so much about the feature and functionality. I just want to deliver or achieve this outcome.
Yeah, what do you think we found ourselves in this situation? Is this? I mean, we're talking about it here. Others are obviously on the same topic, trying to solve it as well. But is this just we didn't realize this was so important, or the leaders of some of our businesses don't have those skills either, and so they find it difficult to share that knowledge and train their team on it and focus on it? I mean, what? Can you attribute how we found ourselves in this situation where a lot of professional services organizations are dealing with this giant business acumen gap, and it's a blind spot, right, to them?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to go into the history of it, I look back kind of at that company man era where if you started your career with a company, you would be promoted and developed over 40 years with that company. And so they were heavily invested in your success. You can think of like a GE with their Crotonville, where they were sending people there to develop them to be the future leaders of GE. Whereas I feel like now the culture is much more transactional. You hire a consultant, you expect them to consult for you, but you also kind of expect them to leave in a couple of years to get better pay somewhere else. So why invest in their development if they're just going to leave you? And so I think that's really the root of the problem is that companies just aren't as invested because the employees aren't as invested either.
Yeah, I think that you could look at SaaS sometimes, even at the executive level, as a stock play, right? We're here for, and if we're running fast, then we stay, and if we're not running fast, then we leave. But also, I think part of it is they don't yet see PS as the powerful tool it is. I mean, they're definitely investing in sales training, right? And account management training, because they can see the correlation in their mind to new so. And we thank you for mentioning Crotonville. We teach there. We used to teach there. So, but yeah, I think it's part. We're still in the blooming stages of our organization's understanding, and we see this differently in the hardware product PS groups. They have the same challenge of skills, but they don't have the same challenge of their executives not wanting them to play a bigger role. So I think it's where we are in the maturity of the business.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, the first discount customers always ask for is on services, right? And sales is always saying, well, you need to help us justify services, which is crazy when you think that these customers are spending hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars on a solution. Do they think it's just going to implement itself? No, you need services to ensure that they're going to get a return on their investment and be successful. So I totally agree. I do think there is a lot of development in that area where we have to really push the value of services.
And so we've undervalued professional services a little bit. We've because of average tenure and expectations of team members' role, and maybe even this idea of the replaceability of we get somebody in here if they leave because they tend to leave, then we just find a new person. And right, we can debate the merits of any of those, but we found ourselves in this situation right now where we've pushed the burden of training and development on our professional services team onto them rather than owning more and more of that journey. And I think you experienced some of that as you were coming up through your career as well. There's a lot of people out there that are now in that situation that says, "And my team's, my organization, my team, my whatever is not providing me with any of this development." Mitchell, how did you go about doing that and training yourself on some of this?
Yeah, so this is all coming from my firsthand experience, being with companies where I saw the learning and development teams getting cut back, and then eventually eliminated to the point where training was pushed upon the managers who already have a full-time job to run their services teams, or, to help the consultants realize that they need it and so they should develop it on their own. And I really realized when I was promoted into a leadership position and I was in these conversations with executives and with senior leaders where I was having to Google terms that I didn't understand, things like revenue recognition, ARR impact, PS margin, were just a couple of those that I was Googling silently on the side. And so I made it my own personal mission to help develop myself in those areas. I would read books, I would research, I would talk to the finance people after the call and just say, hey, can you help me understand what we were talking about here? And really, one turning point was learning how to communicate with executives in terms that they understood. And instead of saying, hey, we completed 10 projects, which is what gets service leaders excited or service resources excited, being able to say, we accelerated $5 million in revenue, which is what gets executives excited. And so that shift is really what helped me um, accelerate my career and have a better seat at that strategy table.
One thing we're seeing along those lines a lot more now, and we're putting out a lot more content about, is how to track your data in a way that educates your organization to how they want to have the PS organization perform. And we all know some of the simple drivers. How much of our billable time is involved in sales? How much did we write off project value to support a deal? How much are we running over to fix problems? These categories are not to poke fingers, but to educate our masters, if you will, that hey, you can use the organization in a lot of ways. Consistent use of it helps in development and education of our people and motivation of our people. But just having the data is really helpful.
Yeah, I'm a huge data guy. I love a robust professional services automation tool that makes use of all the data. And I think you're right, where the easiest data to have is just, what are your end dates? What are your task dates? Things like that. And if that's what's front and center to consultants and project managers and leaders, that's what they're going to focus on. They're going to focus on completing tasks. They're going to focus on closing projects. But you need to provide them with that higher level data that helps them understand the business as a whole. And that's what's going to get them to change their behaviors and start to drive the outcomes that executives want to see.
Yeah, and one of the things, I'm glad you said that, one of the things we're pushing people to track during a project are kind of three things. One is, what does the client need to understand and buy into along the project so that they realize how great it's going or where our challenges are, and to be explicit about that and measure the education of the client along the way, because that's not natural for PS. Another one is, how does this lead directly to more PS or more product pull through, and how's that going to manifest itself? And the third one is just, how are we going to build better relationships with the executives at the customer, at the client, and to measure all that and work it. And man, that's been a really big impact on people's, because you're right, we only do what we're measured, right? And we only do what we talk about. And we found that really a groundbreaking difference in the mindset of our managers at the client. Because, not that long ago, you'd hear them say, and you still hear it sometimes, my job is to get in and out, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think a pure example of that is, and then Mitchell, I'd like you to kind of expand on that topic a little bit, is, right, okay, our project timeline, we're implementing something, we're adding a new custom feature, we're doing something to enhance the technology or the product purchase that somebody has bought from us, and professional services gets in there and they're in place. Well, there's, it's a 2-month implementation, or it's a 2-month design, or it's whatever the project itself is. We get in, we get out, and we communicate, well, we finished 4 days early, or we're 3 days ahead of schedule, or this is happening in this way. But taking that and just saying, hey, we finished early, well, why does that actually matter? Well, it matters internally because it frees up our capacity to go do other things. But why does that matter to the client? Well, that matters to the client because you're up and live on the system 3 days earlier, which can, depending on can result in this kind of revenue or this kind of impact or this kind of operational efficiency. And so converting we are doing this and we are working ahead of schedule. And because of that, you are getting all of these business outcomes out of it, not just we got done early kind of outcome. And I do think we're missing that connection point in the conversations we're having with our clients really often. So I don't know if you have some experience on that topic or.
And the same thing goes when we're behind schedule, right? It's the same. We've got to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I always hear, how do we speed up implementation? How do we reduce time to value? And we do have to communicate to the customers why we're trying to not race through it, but we want to get them live. We want to get them experiencing the benefits of using the solution. And it does make it tough because you want the time to develop the relationship, but at the same time, you're kind of speeding it along. And so it is a tough balance to strike. But I do think that with that clear communication, everyone can be on the same page and appreciate the outcomes together.
We're doing a survey right now, in the early part of the survey, and it's very interesting to me, and it's all about SaaS implementation. The early, it's halfway done, says the intimacy created in the implementation from the client's point of view, so for the journey and experience, far outweighs the speed, even though they talk about speed. Think about how big that is, right? I'm going to talk about as a client, what I understand, which is speed. But what I'm going to measure and evaluate and be sticky on is how much did I intimately work with those people and enjoy it and feel like they cared about me, and right. And that's and that's consulting, by the way. That's what it is, right? It's to bring the client along and make them feel like the truth is we do care about you, and the project must be done, but along the way, you've got to have an experience and a leave behind capability that you can continue to get the value out of it, which also is a challenge.
Yeah, sparking a lot of thoughts around references, of course. References are the lifeblood of a sales organization, and so you want to focus on those things that are going to generate those references. It also makes me think about how much really true consulting is happening at SaaS companies versus just implementation that we're calling consulting. We think of consulting in the traditional sense of, management consulting, long-term engagements, hopefully multi-year relationships. Whereas SaaS, we call it consulting, but maybe it's just implementation, and we're just trying to jam these customers into our solution and move on. And we're not leaving time for that consultative relationship to develop.
Yeah, and I think we need to, we don't need to go all the way to be Deloitte or something, but we need to understand they are paying consulting fees. They expect consulting relationships.
Totally agree. And I think that's really where a lot of consultants at these SaaS companies fall short, is because they understand the solution, but they don't understand their customer's business context. And so they can't really consult on how to improve their customer's business because they just know the software. And they can tell you what this setting does or that setting does, but they can't tell you how those settings lead to outcomes that are truly meaningful to the customer.
Yeah, another balance of that, and Anthony, I know you want to say something, and I apologize, but another balance to that is how, if you took a continuum between consulting capability and subject matter expert capability, your team's got to be able to cover that. And I think we also really look to subject matter experts who haven't been challenged on the other side, and may not want to be, because what they've been rewarded on all this time is, I know the software better. So we kind of lean over to SMEs and less over to the consultative skills.
Yeah, well, and we earlier we were on the topic of, hey, the organization is not. We've moved away from investing in our talent and developing some of these business acumen related skills. One of the many reasons why that's a skill set that falls short in our organization. But Mitchell, the example you just gave of, right, we're going in and we're implementing, but we are not doing the broader consulting for the organization. Well, doing some of that broader consulting requires some level of that business acumen as you pull others into initial interviews and conversations and design meetings and those sorts of things, knowing how this, not just how the technology is going to work within their organization, but how all the processes that surround that technology actually are going to work, and what that means for their business becomes really important to helping advise them appropriately. And if we think about it from the leader of the business's perspective, this isn't just about expanding the consulting capabilities of our professional services team so that we can uncover more opportunities and have more long-term engagements and drive more revenue. All of that's possible, but if we're doing all those other things, we should be improving customer experience. We should be reducing future churn and increasing our retention because they're actually going to get the value out of this. We're doing all these other things that benefit the entire organization if we view our role as not just get in, check the box on making sure that whatever our assignment was got completed, but instead making sure that the customer's getting the value out of their technology, and we're the advisors to help them navigate their way through that. Like that mindset shift is not just a consulting or a professional services benefit. That's an entire organization benefit. And I don't know if everybody, to Dean's point, connects those dots between the role professional services can play strategically in your organization if you're doing all those things that I just mentioned.
Yeah, it'll make your solution stickier because it's going to be not necessarily purpose built, but it's really going to be deeply integrated into how your customer operates because you took the time to understand and to optimize the solution for their context. And they're going to feel heard. And like you said, they're not going to want to leave because they feel like this is a company that understands me and is going to be there for me when I need them.
Yeah. And I think that's all the difference. It can be, because SaaS is not as sticky as software used to be, all the difference in the world. And I think that may be the mantra we should really be, matter of fact, I'm writing a white paper right now on stickiness, but I think that's the mantra we should be really beating our non-PS leaders about is, minimizing errors, maximizing stickiness, and pulling through product. And those are the three things. But it's done this different way.
Yeah, so we're sort of dancing all around this broader topic of business acumen, but there's also this thread of executive communication that exists in all of this, right? We can have the best business acumen in the world, but how do we actually communicate that in a way that compels our buyers and their counterparts within the organization outside of even the function we're working in to change their behavior, to act, to be compelled by whatever it is that we're working on. Mitchell, any suggestions that you have on kind of what to focus on, particularly around this concept of executive communication?
Yeah, this really clicked for me. So I was in professional services, and then I had a stint where I was chief of staff to the CEO of our company, which was tremendous for my growth because it got me out of that professional services context and it put me into the boardroom with the executives. And for the first time, I was able to hear what they were talking about amongst themselves and what they cared about. And it was totally different than the things that I was, thinking about. I was thinking about, you know, reporting on my activity. How many hours did I work? How many projects did I complete? Things like that. Whereas the executives, they were talking about, revenue acceleration. How do we reduce risk? What's that customer lifetime value and how are we extending it? And so I really think that, not everyone can go be a chief of staff to the CEO, though I do think that that's a great developmental role for a lot of high performers. But just taking the time to train them, in a weekly meeting, team meeting, or one-on-one, this is what matters to the business more broadly, and this is how your work connects to it. And so let's figure out how we can communicate that to the executives the next time that we meet with them or present on professional services. So really developing that awareness and that knowledge was hugely helpful for myself.
How about on the client side? Communicating to those client executives. And how much time do we actually spend doing that outside of steering committees or steering committees?
Yeah, I think that this relates to that topic we were just talking about, where you really have to be someone who understands the customer and understands what their business, or sometimes the customer doesn't even like it when you call it a business. I've worked in kind of public sector, and if you talk about your business, they kind of bristle at that and say, well, we're not a business, we're a public service. And so just understanding how your customer thinks and what's important to them. Public sector, they're not interested in driving revenue necessarily, even though some of the things that they do bring money into their organization. And so just taking the time to understand what is their end goal, what are they trying to accomplish, and then, of course, developing the ability to understand the nuances and the depth behind those conversations. Most of the best consultants, I do think, come from industry and then are brought over to the consulting side, and they're able to work with customers as peers because they've been there and they've done that. But that's not to say that you can't train someone who's never been in industry to understand the customer. I think it just takes a little more time and development internally to make that happen.
Yeah, it's a blended team, right? As we talked about, and I'll pick on Anthony and I. Anthony and I are definitely people that came into consulting very early in our careers. Obviously, a little different time frame. I came in right after World War II. Anthony got here yesterday. So, but both of us started very young, and then but got exposed to a lot of businesses, right? And that really helped. So I think we feel really good about what we've learned today. Anthony, do you have a few more or anything else you want to ask? And Mitch, thanks so much for coming in. Very articulate discussion. We really appreciate that. But anything else, Anthony?
No, I mean, I think, Mitchell, if you could give the audience a couple of key things to keep in mind as they think about this conversation and think about the application of what we're talking about here for their business.
Yeah, well, I would just encourage, the leaders who are listening to this to take a step back and assess their organization's current approach to training and development. Are they just training their consultants on how to use the solution and how to implement it, or are they training them on, their customers' business needs and their customers' business context, as well then as the internal context of how does professional services fit into a SaaS company? And what are the things that your own executives care about? And if you're not training on that, you'll probably have people who leave because they're just not as committed to the business, and they think, oh, I can go get trained on another software and implement it for better pay somewhere else, as opposed to, hey, I'm really invested in this business and in this industry, and I want to develop and grow my career here rather than somewhere else.
Yeah, training always builds a more intimate relationship with your people. You're investing in them, and we love your topics. So thank you so much, and thank everybody for attending. And Mitch, we look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed Mitch's talk because, our heart and soul is all about lifting the overall quality of the PS business and making it a career, not just a job, and making sure they're able to do their job, and to run across someone who is so passionate about them ability to do their job. And I like that the take he did. He didn't just do the consulting skills. He also said you got to understand business acumen and how your business fits in your own company. So I thought that was good.
Yeah, and I think he broke business acumen up into two separate categories, I think. One is just like general business acumen around key terms like revenue and profitability and EBITDA and things like that, the terms that the business leaders speak in. And then the other piece to it was the business acumen associated with, okay, how does this actual business in this industry operate, and what metrics are important to them, what's unique about how they would communicate. And I think it was telling at the end, his suggestion on, I think some of the best consultants come out of industry. And I think that's partly because his experience has been, we have a bunch of consultants that came in as consultants, and those that came out of a specific industry had all that quote unquote business acumen.
Right.
But I think that's all, if you focus on it and you develop it, and he's an example of this, you can learn those kinds of things. But you do have to make sure that we're developing those people. We are focused on that problem, and we recognize how important it is to be able to speak the language of the rest of our organization and of our clients.
It is a really good point, because if you come from industry or you come from education, as a junior person, you still have to learn the consulting skills, right? Now I have noticed the people from industry might have a tougher time because they already have been, if you will, indoctrinated into corporate America, which is much more function oriented and much more less fluid than the consultative PS business. But as you said, anybody who's really determined to learn it can.
Yes, and there's benefits from whatever the background that you come with.
Absolutely.
To do it. You just have to recognize it's a different kind of business. You have gaps, and you and your leadership needs to focus on doing that. But to Mitchell's point, maybe less and less leadership support of those kinds of things, either because of a blind spot or a lack of urgency around developing our talent out of some of the I don't know, the
Yeah, and
fees.
I think we own some responsibility to the market to push that there's a value to this and there's a requirement to this and educate, along with all the PS leaders. But we can't, I don't want to be here 5 years from now and feel like and the industry still won't invest in the talent to understand how to do a good job. And
Well, I mean, everybody we have on this is I mean, it's a testament to everybody is passionate about trying to do their part about contributing knowledge and value to back to the industry. And so there are many out there that are both would see the value in that, right, because they're participating in it, but then also actively want to contribute in it. So I I think there's more out there that are looking for some of those things, but perhaps for whatever reason it gets deprioritized.
Yeah. Clearly, the PS leaders we deal with, I mean, we touch about 8,000 a week. They're involved. And maybe they've just given up trying to educate. I don't know. But yeah, I want to change all that. But anyway, Mitch did a great job. We really appreciate everybody participating today. And Anthony, anything you want to close us with?
Yeah, I just, if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, and your favorite podcast channel. Also, feel free to check out Dean or myself on our LinkedIn pages for more content that we produce regularly on this subject. Also, reach out to us that way or at the Consultants Way email address, which is podcast@consultantsway.com. Almost forgot our email address.
It's a long one.
If you have any feedback, suggestions, future guests, and that feedback should not include, remember your email address. And
Yeah, because we know that one. Or get rid of old guys. We can't do that.
Yeah. Or both of us can wear a hat next time. I don't know. We'll figure it out.
I'm wearing a hat because I had a little operation. So there you go.
There you go. All right.
Next
Thanks,
week,
everybody.
no hat. All right. Take care, everybody.